I thought my life would be quieter by now, that the mistakes I'd made would fade into the hum of ordinary days. But standing behind the counter of the bookstore, sorting a pile of returned novels, I realized some mistakes refused to leave you alone. I was young, 23, and maybe too eager to notice the world in shades rather than black and white. But nothing had prepared me for her. She walked in like she owned the silence, though her heels barely clicked against the linoleum floor. Mid-40s, maybe, and somehow both composed and restless at the same time. Hair pulled back loosely, glasses slipping down the bridge of her nose. She had that aura, one part confidence, one part something softer I couldn't name. I noticed the way she lingered on the shelves, fingers brushing the spines with careful attention, as if she were cataloging memories rather than books. "Do you have?" she started, and I caught the hesitation in her voice. Something about the way she asked made me want to know what she didn't say. I cleared my throat, trying not to stumble over my words. "We might." "Which title?" My hands felt sticky from the returned paperbacks, and I realized I was gripping the edge of the counter harder than necessary. She smiled, just a flicker, enough to tilt her head, enough to make my stomach betray me. "Something that reminds me of forgiveness, maybe, or endings I didn't expect." I froze, because it wasn't just the request, it was the subtext. That pause, that quiet edge of vulnerability. I wanted to ask more, to offer an explanation or reassurance, but the word stuck. She didn't wait for me to speak anyway, moving on to scan another shelf, still present, still making me aware of my own awkward heartbeat. I watched her, noticed how she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the faint crease between her brows when she paused mid-step. There was a tiny, almost imperceptible shake in her hand as she lifted a book off the shelf. Something about it made me want to steady her, even though I had no right, no reason, no claim to do anything at all. "Here," I finally said, handing her a small, leather-bound journal I'd spotted tucked behind a stack of novels. "This one, maybe it'll help." Her eyes met mine then, and the world contracted. She tilted the journal, glanced at it, and for a fraction of a second, our fingers brushed. A small act, a flicker of connection that neither of us named. She smiled again, softer this time, almost like a secret shared between strangers. And then she left, just like that, the bell above the door jingling her departure. I turned back to the counter, tried to act normal, but the image of her, her subtle confidence, the way she made ordinary space feel electric, lingered. I kept catching myself thinking about that brush of fingers, that moment that should have meant nothing but instead settled somewhere stubborn and impossible in my chest. I couldn't stop wondering, would I ever see her again? Or had she already erased herself from this quiet corner of my life, leaving only the memory of something that never had a name? The next time I saw her, it was in the tiny repair shop tucked behind the corner of Main Street, where the smell of motor oil and coffee hung in the air like a stubborn fog. She was leaning over a desk, trying to wrestle a stubborn notebook from its shattered spine. Her fingers moved with precision, but I could see the tension in the way her knuckles whitened. "I can try," I said, approaching carefully. Not too close, not too eager. I didn't want to scare her off, but I also couldn't just walk away. She glanced up at me, eyebrows knitting together, lips pressed into a line. She didn't smile, not at first, but there was a flicker of something, hesitation, maybe, or trust, before she nodded. "I don't want to ruin it," she murmured, almost to herself. I knelt beside her, hands hovering over the torn binding. I didn't speak. I just let the quiet settle around us. Watching her, I noticed the small things, the slight tremble of her hands as she adjusted a page, the way her laugh came in short, sharp bursts when she realized the notebook's corners were stubbornly stuck together, and the way her eyes, even when focused on the task, betrayed fatigue, a life heavier than her calm exterior suggested. "Here," I said softly, guiding her hands with mine, careful not to linger too long, though the electricity of proximity made my skin itch. Her fingers brushed mine again. She froze, and I could feel her pulse, almost in sync with mine. She pulled back slightly, and for a moment, her gaze darted away. I could read the caution there, the invisible walls she kept between herself and everyone else. Yet, even as she tried to maintain distance, I saw the subtle curve of her lips, the barely there sigh when a page finally gave way. Vulnerable, human, open. I wanted to ask what it was that weighed on her, but I stayed silent. The silence itself felt heavy, but charged, like the air before a storm. I wanted to lean closer, to reach for the part of her she wouldn't let anyone touch. But I didn't. She glanced at me quickly, a small, almost imperceptible acknowledgement, before returning her attention to the notebook. But our fingers had lingered for a heartbeat longer than necessary, and the brush of contact left something stubborn in the air, a tension neither of us claimed but both of us felt. When the repair was finally done, she exhaled sharply, almost embarrassed by relief, almost like she hadn't meant to let herself be so aware of me. I stepped back, letting her regain her space, but I couldn't stop noticing the way her shoulders slumped just a little, how tired she seemed despite her composure. "Thank you," she said, voice quieter than the clatter of tools around us, eyes downcast. But in that quiet, I heard something that didn't quite fit words, something raw, almost dangerous in its restraint. And then she turned to leave, but paused in the doorway. For a single, suspended moment, our eyes met again, and I thought I saw her breathe differently, as if she'd felt it too. That small, charged fraction of time lingered, and even after the door closed behind her, I couldn't stop replaying it. The brush of fingers, the flicker of trust, the unspoken electricity. The rain came down in sheets that evening, drumming against the large windows of the cafe where we'd ended up by chance. I hadn't planned on seeing her again, but neither had she, and somehow the universe didn't care about our timing. We sat across from each other, the table too small for the space we tried to maintain, yet close enough that our knees nearly touched under the dim, flickering light. She stirred her coffee slowly, eyes tracing the rim of the cup as if the motion could distract her from something she wasn't saying. I wanted to fill the silence, to say something, anything, that might bridge the invisible line between us, but I stopped. I watched her instead, noticing the subtle tightness in her jaw, the slight tremor in her hand as she lifted the mug. "You ever regret things?" I asked finally, quieter than the storm outside. Her gaze flicked up, sharp for a second, and then softer, almost fleeting. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Not enough to confess, not enough to ease the weight I could feel pressing in the air." A laugh escaped her throat at something a passerby shouted into the rain. I caught it, a brittle, beautiful sound that made me ache in a way I wasn't supposed to. She leaned forward just slightly, hair brushing my shoulder. A near contact that neither of us corrected, and the world shrank into the tiny space between us. I wanted to reach across the table, to take her hand, to anchor whatever fragile connection was forming, but I didn't. My chest tightened at the restraint, at the knowledge that I was teetering on the edge of something forbidden, something impossible. Then her phone buzzed, and the moment cracked. She glanced at it and sighed, frowning. I saw the name flash. Mark. Ex-husband, ex-lover, ghost from a past that she didn't owe me explanations for. She answered quickly, polite but clipped, nodding and muttering before stepping just far enough away to make the space between us feel like a canyon. I stared at the table, at the empty space she'd left behind, feeling the pull of everything unsaid. I wanted to speak while she was on the call, to tell her something, anything, but the words lodged in my throat. When she returned, smiling faintly as if nothing had happened, I realized the storm outside wasn't nearly as loud as the one building inside me. For a moment, we were silent again, both aware of what lingered. I noticed the way her hair smelled faintly of rain, the warmth radiating from her scarf, the hesitant weight of her gaze when it finally met mine. A heartbeat passed where I imagined the world narrowing until we were the only two people left. I wanted to tell her that the seconds she lingered beside me were everything, that the brush of her sleeve against mine should have meant more. But I didn't. Instead, I just let the storm rage outside and held my tongue, even as my fingers twitched toward her, hovering over the forbidden edge of contact. The almost, just barely, hung between us, delicate and unsaid, and I knew it would haunt me long after the rain stopped. We ended up on the rooftop that evening, the city below washed in amber streetlight and the distant hum of traffic. The wind tugged at her coat, and I noticed how she braced herself, not just against the cold, but against something invisible, something between us. For a long time, we said nothing. I watched her, tracing the angles of her face in the dim glow, the way her shoulders hunched just slightly, as if she carried more than the chill. Her hands were stuffed into her pockets, knuckles white around the edges, and I wanted, so badly, to reach out and steady her. But I didn't. Finally, she spoke, voice low, almost hesitant. "Do you ever wonder if we're just pretending?" I froze, caught mid-breath. Pretending? The word hung in the air, heavier than the night itself. I wanted to answer carefully, but my thoughts tumbled too fast. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I already felt the truth in her eyes. She wasn't asking about the world. She was asking about us. She shook her head, a small, bitter laugh escaping. "I don't know. This, whatever it is, it shouldn't feel like this. And yet it does. I'm tired of pretending I don't notice you noticing me. And maybe you're pretending too." Her gaze pierced mine, and in that moment, I realized she saw everything. The hesitation, the longing, the way I kept measuring her against the world. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. Words would ruin it. Words would label something too large, too complicated to fit into a sentence. The silence stretched, and I noticed the subtle quiver of her lips, the faint tremor in her hands as they rose to adjust her coat. Every micro-movement spoke volumes, louder than any confession I could force. "I don't want to hurt anyone," she whispered finally, almost to herself. "I don't want this." Her eyes flicked away for a heartbeat, then returned, shimmering in the streetlight. I wanted to tell her that I didn't care about right or wrong, that I didn't care about consequences, that all I wanted was to stay in that suspended moment with her. But I couldn't. The words lodged somewhere deep, heavy and unspoken. Instead, I simply leaned slightly closer, enough that the gap between us was smaller, yet still safe. Our shoulders brushed ever so lightly, and she didn't pull away. The electricity between us didn't need acknowledgement. It was there, undeniable. And then she stepped back, breaking the fragile intimacy, and said something that felt like it would echo forever. "I'm not sure I even know who I am when I'm with you." It wasn't anger, or regret, or desire. It was the raw edge of truth. The kind that leaves your chest hollow and your thoughts restless. The kind that makes you realize that whatever this is, it's no longer something either of us can ignore. I stood there, the wind tugging at my coat, and watched her disappear into the city lights, carrying the question with her, leaving me with nothing but silence and the ache of knowing I couldn't follow. It was raining again, though lighter this time, a drizzle that tapped softly against the cafe window where she and I had retreated. She stirred her tea absent-mindedly, eyes distant, tracing the rim of her cup like it held memories she couldn't speak aloud. "I don't usually talk about it," she said suddenly, voice low, almost fragile. Her fingers tightened around the cup, knuckles pale. "But I guess you make it feel like I could." I watched her, careful not to press, careful not to break the fragile trust she was offering. "You don't have to," I said softly. "Only if you want to." She swallowed, exhaling a quiet, shaky laugh. "It's just Mark, my husband. Not even the man I married, someone I loved, maybe too much. I thought he would forgive me for things I shouldn't have done, and when he didn't, he erased me. Entirely. Like I never existed." I stayed quiet, the words hitting me harder than I expected. I thought I knew pain, youthful mistakes, regrets, but this was deep, layered, raw. I saw her eyes glisten, the brief tremor in her hands as she set the cup down. She wasn't asking for pity. She was showing me a fracture, subtle but permanent. I wanted to tell her that she hadn't been erased, that someone still saw her, someone still remembered. But I swallowed, knowing words might cheapen what she'd just risked revealing. Instead, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone, hesitated, and showed her a photo, old and creased at the edges, a quiet moment I'd captured months ago, one of her laughing at a bookstore event, hair loose, completely herself. Her eyes caught it immediately, lingering on the photo as though she could feel the life she thought she'd lost reflected back at her. I didn't speak. She didn't speak. And yet, the small act, this proof that she existed outside her regrets, felt seismic, like a whisper that could crack stone. She blinked, lips trembling, then laughed softly. No irony, no defensiveness, just a release. I forgot what that felt like, she murmured, her voice barely above the rain. To be seen, to be remembered. I wanted to tell her that I'd been seeing her all along, in ways she couldn't imagine. That I'd noticed the small tremble in her hands, the slight hitch in her breath, the fleeting moments where she let her walls drop just enough for me to glimpse her. But I didn't. I let the moment stretch, let it breathe, let it settle between us. And then, as she traced the edge of the photo with her finger, she whispered something I couldn't shake. Maybe it's not too late to be someone again. The words weren't a confession, and they weren't a promise. They were just a quiet tremor in the air, a seismic heartbeat that left me hollow, longing, and painfully aware that everything had just shifted, without a single grand gesture, without a dramatic confrontation, just the weight of memory, acknowledgement, and the invisible thread now binding us. We didn't speak much that evening, not in words that mattered. The library was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses gently against your ears, leaving room for everything else. The subtle shifting of chairs, the whisper of pages turning, the faint hum of the heating system. I was shelving books when she appeared, moving with that same composed ease that somehow still made the air feel charged. She paused near the end of the aisle, a stack of novels in her arms, and glanced at me. No words, just a look that said more than any confession ever could. I felt the weight of it, the truth hovering between us. We had crossed some invisible line, and it wasn't something we could undo. "Do you mind if I sit here?" she asked finally, voice soft, almost uncertain. The chair across from mine scraped gently against the floor. I shook my head, and she lowered herself into it, setting her stack down with deliberate care. We worked side by side, not speaking, letting silence carry the conversation. I noticed the slight tremor in her hands as she adjusted a book, the small sigh that escaped when she leaned back. I reached out almost without thinking, brushing my fingers against hers as I handed her a notebook. She didn't pull away. Instead, her thumb lingered briefly against mine, like a quiet acknowledgement of everything unspoken. No declarations, no grand gestures, just presence. And in that presence, everything shifted. The tension, the longing, the regret. They didn't vanish, but they folded into something calmer, steadier, inevitable. We had earned this space together, step by tentative step, moment by careful moment. She looked up at me then, eyes meeting mine fully, and I saw something there I hadn't before. Relief, understanding, and a fragile trust. I wanted to say more, to fill the space with words, but I realized that what mattered wasn't language. What mattered was this: shared air, shared space, and the simple acknowledgement that we had found each other in the midst of all the chaos. For the first time, I felt the restraint in my chest ease, replaced with a gentle certainty. I shifted slightly in my chair, and she leaned just a fraction closer. Our hands brushed again, this time deliberately, naturally, and I felt the subtle electricity settle into something warm and quiet. Not need, not obsession, just connection. Real and human. She leaned back, exhaling softly, and for a heartbeat, we simply sat there, the silence no longer heavy but complete. I caught the faint scent of her coat, the small rhythm of her breathing, and let myself anchor to it. No words were needed. The tension had collapsed into something softer, something earned, something unspoken yet undeniable. And as she picked up her stack and slid quietly into her coat, fingers brushing mine one last time, I realized I wouldn't forget this. Not the storm, not the silence, not the brief contact. It was enough. It had always been enough. It's been months since that night in the library, months since the rain-soaked cafe, months since I realized that some connections don't announce themselves with fireworks. They settle quietly, like the first hint of winter snow, subtle but undeniable. I still see her sometimes, in brief glances, in the way a book falls open to a page I'd never noticed, in the small, tender gestures that linger long after she's gone. I've changed. I notice more now. The pauses, the tremors, the silences that speak louder than words. I've learned to respect the weight of someone else's past, to move slowly, to feel without demanding. And I think she's changed too, though in ways quieter, less visible. There's a softness to her movements, a willingness to let someone in without surrendering herself entirely. She still carries the remnants of old heartbreak, but she wears them differently now, like a coat she's chosen, not one forced upon her. Our story wasn't about grand confessions or impossible declarations. It was about noticing, about restraint, about being present enough to feel what's already there, about learning that love doesn't always demand words. Sometimes it's enough to share a space, a brush of fingers, a quiet smile across a table. I think about those moments often. The stormy night where proximity threatened to tip us over the edge. The careful, trembling hands over a torn notebook. The photo that reminded her she existed beyond her regrets. Every brush of her presence etched itself into my memory, not as dramatic scenes, but as soft, persistent sparks that changed the way I understood connection, patience, and longing. We never called it love, not out loud, but I know it in the small, persistent ways she lingers in my thoughts, in the warmth that remains when I think of her. And I think she knows it too, if only in the quiet acknowledgement that two people can touch each other's lives without the world ever needing to see. Sometimes, I wonder what might have happened if I had spoken sooner, if she had let herself lean in a fraction more. But I've learned that timing is rarely perfect, and sometimes what matters is simply being present when you can. That presence, silent, steadfast, patient, is its own kind of devotion. And so here I am, remembering, carrying the afterglow of what we shared, grateful for the lessons hidden in pauses, in restraint, in unsaid truths. I don't regret what we couldn't name. I treasure what we allowed ourselves to feel, fleeting as it was, honest as it was. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?